Let's come back up to glazing and transparent layering. We're gonna start in glazing first, and I'm gonna mix up for this shape that I made, I'm just gonna mix up that same color, the red that I had. And the first one, I'm gonna leave it as fairly transparent, like more water than pigment. And then I'm kind of coming in here and I'm making a cube. So on this right-hand side, I want to use another layer of that red that I had. And then I'm just going to use, I've got a little bit leftover extra, and I'm just going to run that along the top. So that's going to be my lightest that I have there. Don't forget to use your paper towels to kind of dry off your brush. So if you've got extra paint kind of pooling, dry your brush off and go back in there and pull it back up. What? Just go put them, just like kind of set them in the supply closet somewhere, and I'll kind of move them around. All right, then I'm going to come in with the same color, but I'm going to use more pigment than water. And I did a little too much, so I'm going to kind of add water to my brush here and kind of smooth that out a little. Kind of jumped a little too much. Okay, so glazing is what you can use to heighten your values. Okay, so you start light at the beginning and then you work towards your darks in layers. Okay. Now for this form down here on the bottom, I'm going to use a different color, and I'm going to just mix one. You can choose to mix one, or you can just use one of these other ones. So I'm going to mix up purple, and I'm going to use that purple over it. Need more red. Okay, so now I have kind of more of like a red violet, which will work. Bless you. And then I'm almost going to do like a wet on dry kind of technique. So I'm going to lay that pigment down. I'm going to clean my brush off and dry it off, and then I'm going to do that dry blending where I'm just kind of scrubbing along the side there to let that color blend up. Into the rest of the piece, and then I can go in and put darker value down at the bottom just by adding a little bit more pigment. And that's going to change your overall look there. Okay. Hey Jay, can you shut that door for me? All right. Transparent layering. So transparent layering is really, really similar to glazing, but you can get optical like color mixing with that. Okay, so you picked a color to go down here. So then I'm going to come in with my two other colors. I'm going to kind of go where it's more fairly transparent. And I'm going to intersect where I go on either side of that yellow line. And I definitely want to pick up the extra on here. So I want just that kind of faint, starting to pick up too much, kind of a faint color swatch. Okay. So what I should be getting, and I am kind of, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, is I'm getting kind of an optical, like reddish orange or an orange. And then I'm going to come in with my blue, and hopefully I'm going to get an optical blue. I'm going to keep it pretty transparent, as in, so I'm using more water than pigment. Yeah, that one worked real well. I'm going to kind of pick up a little extra that I got going on in here. Okay. So transparent layering can give you the different colors, like mixing without having to like mix. Okay. Okay. All right, now we're gonna get into the fancy things. So you need your thumbtack. On the scratching, take your thumbtack and start making some scratches right into your watercolor paper. So you make those scratches first and then you paint over. And then go ahead and just paint yourself a color swatch down at the bottom. You can see I use the same color, but depending on how much water I use in that, depends on how intense the pigment is. So kind of keep that in mind. So I'm going to let this color swatch just kind of sit here for a little while. And once it kind of starts drying out a little bit, I'm going to come back with my thumbtack and I'm going to scratch in that also. Or I'm just going to let it dry and I'm going to come back to it. Okay. Resist and masking. We've already put those down, like as far as the resist part and the masking part. So you just paint right over. Solid. So those two are fairly easy. So you don't have to necessarily do exactly what I'm doing. I'm just kind of giving you a little more texture just by going in with darker pigment and kind of doing some wet on wet work there. Give it a little more atmosphere. Okay, lifting and blotting. Best way to do this is to work kind of wet on wet. So I'm just going to give a little bit of water to kind of prime it first. And then this is how you can kind of do clouds. So I'm going to go in with a blue color. It does not matter what color you use. That's pretty strong. I'm going to back off a little bit. You can also use lifting and blotting to help with highlights. Okay. So while it's still wet, you want to grab your tissue. You kind of want to bunch it up into a little workable area. And I suggest kind of bunch it up, make it a little wrinkly. And then I'm just going to blot it out. So I'm kind of turning my tissue, kind of going on some opposite sides here. In some areas, I'll leave the tissue down on there for a long time. Some of them I just do a quick touch. Okay, and you're taking the liquid away at that point. So watercolor only really likes to go where there's liquid already, which means that after you lift or blot like that, you can come back in and strengthen up those edges with color by kind of doing some wet on wet technique. And it'll only go where there's already moisture. And then that can kind of get you those different levels of dark and light to make those clouds. Or highlights on rocks or whatever, highlights on anything. So I can kind of go through and kind of work it, do some dry blending a little bit if I want. Okay, kind of like that. Okay, spattering we should be familiar with coffee. Okay, so you can just take any one of your colors that you want, really load up your brush. I kind of like just setting my finger down and tapping my brush against it. So, or you can hold it and kind of tap the end. Some of your spattering may go in other places, that's okay. You can even kind of go back into your splatterings if you want and add some water to them. And that can kind of spread them out and make them into larger inky looking blots. Okay. Is my speed okay? Am I going too fast? Nope. Doing good? Okay. Jay, was that a yes? No? Okay. Okay. All right. Blooms is wet on wet. So priming it with water first. And again, this should be, we should be familiar with this as far as coffee goes. And then you just touch your brush, touch that color in certain spots and just kind of let the water do the work for you. Okay, if you notice that it's not spreading as much as you want, just like in the spattering that I just showed you, you can come back in and add water. And then that'll push those blooms. So kind of like what I've got going on here. So just real gentle, just kind of touching that pigment on there, adding more water, so then I'm increasing that flow or spread. Now I'll do it in the yellow. So notice you can get some color mixing going on with that too, if you so choose. All right, salt. Let's do, I don't know what color I want to do. Just do red. Salt, you need to make sure that you're putting down a pretty heavy layer of watercolor. So it needs to be really nice and wet. So you could do this wet on wet if you want. Just really, really saturate it to where you kind of have like pools of liquid going on in that one. So I did like quite a few layers. And then you just pick up a pinch of salt and sprinkle the salt into that swatch and then just let it be. We'll move it out. We'll remove it out tomorrow. Okay. Right. Rubbing alcohol. Here we go. I'm gonna prime up another color. This blue is really strong. Okay, so I'm just, for rubbing alcohol, just doing kind of another swatch, just like I did salt. And this is where your Q-tip's gonna come into play. Okay, so give yourself a color swatch. I'm gonna move this up a little bit so you can see it better. I'm gonna grab my Q-tip. I'm gonna dip that in the rubbing alcohol pretty generously. And then I'm just gonna touch the Q-tip to the surface of that swatch. Okay, so you can kind of see that the rubbing alcohol resists it, starts resisting it. Okay, the Epsom salt, we won't actually be able to see its effects until tomorrow after it dries. It leaves, it crystallizes. It kind of looks like a layer of like icy frost. So I'm just going to use yellow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab one of my colors and I'm actually going to put it into my little well of Epsom salt. So I'm just putting color into that Epsom salt solution. And then I'm going to paint that newly colored layer in that swatch. And then, like I said, you won't be able to see what it looks like till tomorrow. I would also suggest making sure that you have a lot of watercolor in this one. Really layer it up as much as you can. Okay. So wherever it's the thickest or wherever you have the most liquid in there, the better crystallizing you're going to get. And then wash your brush really good. Okay, saran wrap we'll have to do tomorrow. I forgot about that one. And then we're going to come back to the scratching box. You should have a little swatch there that's dry now. So come back in with your thumbtack and scratch on top of it to where you kind of start peeling back the paper a little bit. So that's your two ways that you can get scratching done in there, showing kind of white lines or colored lines where the watercolor soaks it up. And then my resist box, it's clean or dry, so I'm going to peel up the tape so you see that that resists the color. And then my masking is also dry, so I'm going to go ahead and start peeling that up too. Masking and resist is how you get your whites in a watercolor. Okay. I'll also show you in the lifting and blotting area. So we just use a tissue, and then some of you, I kind of showed this technique in the coffee, but if you come back in with straight water and your brush and you kind of scrub in the areas that you want it to be lighter, you can pull that pigment back out a little bit. So just a heads up, another way that you can lift some of that out of there. Okay? Okay.